So the whole idea of incremental improvements is really to get people to think smaller. Just to think about what steps can I take today. So I really get people thinking more along the lines of, when they wake up in the morning, what one thing are you going to do today to make your own life a little better? What one thing are you going to do maybe to make someone else's life a little better? And what one thing are you going to do maybe to make the world a little better? And by doing it that way, it's a little easier, a little bit more manageable than the whole idea of, going for that big goal and then you haven't really thought about all the steps it's going to take to get there.
Welcome to the Mindful Wealth Podcast. Stop financializing everything. What is true wealth? What's the right metric for success? Much of how we live presupposes that our incomes or spending is a good measuring stick. But can you really quantify success with a bank balance? Or should we include softer things like learning and love, generosity and gratitude, and happiness and well-being? Welcome to the Mindful Wealth Podcast, where we seek advice to help us lead wealthier lives and extend success to a wider community. And now, your hosts, Jonathan Dio and Terrie Shower.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Mindful Wealth Podcast. Today we talk to financial planner and author Mike Brodsky. Mike's book, Incremental Improvements, is really a delve into how the little things that we do every day can have either a virtuous or a negative effect on our long-term goals. Please enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Mindful Wealth Podcast. We're going to be hearing from Mike Brodsky today on the topic of incremental improvements, which is a personal favorite of mine. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Mike is a financial planner, and he's actually written a book called Incremental Improvements. So we're going to get into that a little bit today. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Terrie. How are you?
I'm good. Jonathan, you want to kick us off with the first question?
Absolutely. Mike, this is the easy one, right? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you came to write the book, and what is it in your life that made you really consider this incremental improvements?
Absolutely. I've been a financial advisor since 1997. What really got me into writing the book was when I started as a financial advisor and I found that I was doing meetings, whether it was a 401k enrollment meeting or meetings with clients or potential clients. I found that a lot of times they were asking me questions about things that were completely unrelated to money, completely unrelated to financial planning. They had other questions about other aspects of their lives. And I found myself back when I was with my previous brokerage firm, Smith Barney at the time, I was taking notes on some of the conversations that I was having and trying to put sort of these messages into print or on my computer. I would sort of type up the messages that I was delivering on a regular basis. People were asking me questions about different issues, and I would find myself just trying to craft those messages and putting those messages on paper or really on a computer screen, and just trying to keep improving those messages to be able to deliver them better each time I delivered them. And when I was at my previous firm, I really never could have written the book. It wouldn't have been allowed. I wasn't allowed to have outside business activities. I know you spent a brief period of time with that company, so you know that, Jonathan. But when our team moved over to a different company, we moved over to Ameriprise Financial, and I found out that I could write a book. I just had to get all the approvals from our corporate compliance department and from FINRA, the industry regulators. But I figured that I had sort of written enough of these notes that there seemed to be a book that was kind of developing. And that's really where the Incremental Improvements book sort of came from. And this is sort of the finished product right here. But it was really just a matter of kind of going back and looking through those notes and trying to put together that book. And this is what came out of that process.
So it's interesting, the story you tell about incrementally improving the message to your clients to answer their questions is the topic and the substance of the book.
It's very, very meta, isn't it?
It is. It's totally meta. That's awesome. Yeah. And I'm familiar with that. It's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, your book is a great concept as well. I mean, to come from a Buddhist sort of a philosophy and share that message is, I also found very intriguing as well. There seems to be a lot of overlap in terms of the kinds of themes that we both talk about in our books. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the book itself is a process that yes was incrementally improved over a period of time.
Like, why incremental improvements? Like, let's say I'm a financial planner, or let's say, in my field in real estate, like our clients ask us a lot of questions. We have a lot of things that are sort of recurring, but why incremental improvements? Why not something else?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, when it comes to financial planning, and hopefully Jonathan will back me up on this, we're talking about something that is very long-term oriented, right? And sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to try to take a look at the ultimate end goal. And the whole idea of incremental improvements, I mean, certainly it's not my concept. It exists in other formats. I mean, certainly the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen is the same. Or this is also known as marginal improvements, or even baby steps, the concept that people are familiar with as well, especially if you're a fan of the movie What About Bob? So the incremental improvements was really just a way to kind of encapsulate some ways to think about all of these things that we're all trying to accomplish in different aspects of our life, not just the money aspect, but health or diet or exercise or relationships or career and so on and so forth. I mean, in my book, I do kind of break out into all these different chapters on different subjects and kind of show how to use this kind of an incremental improvements strategy to achieve a lot of different goals. So certainly for real estate, nobody becomes a real estate mogul overnight. It's got to come from the first real estate deal that you put together, and then move on to your next deal. And it's sort of taking those steps, and then along the way, put all of this stuff together, and all of a sudden you really have something there, right? So I guess another way to think about it, I know we're getting close to the end of the year, and a lot of people will probably start thinking about their New Year's resolutions. And if you think about the incremental improvements concept, especially as it relates to New Year's resolutions, the statistic that I had heard was that 80% of all New Year's resolutions will have failed by Groundhog Day. Now, does Montreal have the Groundhog Day? Or nobody
Yeah.
Sure, okay. But so basically, people give it about a month, and all of a sudden they've just given up on their New Year's resolutions. And a lot of times it's because they're overwhelmed. They come up with this New Year's resolution, like I want to lose 30 pounds, or I want to be a millionaire, or hey, I'm gonna, whatever the goal is that they're trying to accomplish. It can be so overwhelming that they realize I'm hardly making any progress here. The heck with it, I'll try again next year. And so the whole idea of incremental improvements is really to get people to think smaller. Just to think about what steps can I take today. And so I really get people thinking more along the lines of, when they wake up in the morning, what one thing are you going to do today to make your own life a little better? What one thing are you going to do maybe to make someone else's life a little better? And what one thing are you going to do maybe to make the world a little better? And by doing it that way, it's a little easier, a little bit more manageable than the whole idea of, going for that big goal, and then if you haven't really thought about all the steps it's going to take to get there. So, for someone who says, "Oh, I want to drop 30 pounds," okay, great. Well, let's figure out, how can you cut maybe 100 calories out of your diet today, or what substitutions are you going to make in your diet to get a little closer to that ultimate goal? You're not going to lose 30 pounds overnight; it doesn't happen. But on a day-to-day basis, how can you just kind of maybe just tweak your diet a little bit to lose the weight over a longer period of time? So maybe at the end of the week, if you've lost a pound or two, terrific. And then another week goes by and you lose another pound or two, that's great. Or certainly in the financial planning realm, nobody becomes a millionaire overnight unless they buy the right lotto ticket. And barring that, it's really just a matter of getting people to get into the habit of saying, okay, I'm going to save $20 a paycheck. And then you try to get them to the point where they're saving maybe $50 a paycheck, and just get them to keep taking those little steps. And if they do it long enough, eventually they should become a millionaire, but it's not going to happen overnight. They really have to be realistic about how long it takes. And to achieve that ultimate goal, it's a matter of taking all the little steps along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great answer. And I think what I love about that nugget you just shared with us is that there's really two things. One is the size of the goal, and the fact that if you set yourself these big goals, which I think all of us have big long-term goals, if you just see that it's not happening in a week or 2 weeks, it's easy to get demotivated.
Sure.
So I think that's one great thing. The other thing, and it's kind of segues into my next question, is a little bit about instant gratification. So I think there are a lot of choices that we make, small choices that we make every day, where we're making the wrong small choices. So I think diet is like a perfect example, because if you just say, okay, well, I'm going to eat that extra cookie, or I'm just going to have seconds, or I'm just going to make one small choice that seems like something that I'm doing in a very short-term way. So we all have this motivation or like an incentive to go for what's pleasurable in the short term, and maybe not understand how that adds up to long-term big gains or big losses. So I don't know, would you have some kind of advice for people how to, in the moment, make virtuous choices that keep us on track with our goals?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great example of how this kind of a philosophy really can work. Especially when it comes to diet or what we're eating. The one thing that I mentioned in the book is this whole idea that if the diet that you're currently on requires you to give up most of the foods that you love, or if it requires you to really dramatically change the kinds of things that you're eating, chances are you're probably not going to stick with it, right? Because all your life you've been eating a certain way, and then all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm going to start this new diet where I'm not going to eat any carbs, I'm not going to eat any sugar, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that. And the reality is, within a matter of days, you're going to be craving all those things, right? I mean, that's exactly what you're going to want to eat, because the diet says you're not supposed to eat it. And if you eat that stuff, you're going to fail in your diet. So what we try to get people to think about is, okay, you've already been eating a certain way all your life. How do you make certain changes just on a day-to-day basis? So if you want to have that cookie that you mentioned, have the cookie, but don't have 7 of them. Or, maybe just have even a few bites. Maybe you don't have to eat the whole cookie, and at least you're sort of getting a taste of that cookie that you like. And it kind of works with other foods too. Obviously, you can't be binging on all these foods that you know are bad for you, but you don't have to necessarily cut them out completely. You just have to be realistic about how that fits into your overall diet and how that's going to impact your ability to maintain your health, right? So you just have to make the decision. If it's important for you to ultimately remain healthy, to ultimately lose weight, you have to be aware of all the steps and all the actions that you take and the impact that it's going to have on your health or on your weight. So we're not saying never touch a cookie again for the rest of your life. We're just saying if you're going to eat a cookie once in a while, it could be a nice little treat once in a while. You don't have to necessarily eat the entire cookie, but just be aware of how many cookies you're consuming over a period of time. So, I think people need to really think about the impact of all of the actions that they're taking, and also what are they willing to commit to? Because if people are not willing to commit to making any changes in their life or any changes in their diet, then none of this is going to work. But if people are willing to commit and say, okay, in the past, I was eating too many fried foods. I'm going to make a concerted effort now to cut back on the amount of fried foods that I consume. Or I'm going to make a concerted effort to cut back on the amount of sugar I'm consuming, or whatever. I mean, we all kind of know what's good for you and what's bad for you. So we're not necessarily saying give up everything that's bad, but at least be aware if you're going to eat some of those bad foods, eat them in moderation, be aware of the ultimate impact that it's going to have on your health and on your diet.
But what do I do when I'm in the moment and I just really want to do whatever thing is bad for me? And like we're talking about about diet, but like, let's put this more into like, let's say a financial planning context or like something, you know, I really want to buy the latest thing and I'm going to get off track with my saving goal if I do that. But there's always a little excuse in my head of why should I listen? Like, why is this time different? Should this be the exception? And then I'm trapped in this instant gratification cycle.
Right.
So,
you know, I think the one thing that it's important for everyone to come to terms with the fact that life is really about the choices that we make along the way, right? So you gave some interesting examples about sort of the short-term instant gratification, you know, hey, I need that hot new little toy or device or whatever. I mean, right here, I'm looking right here at my new iPhone 12 that just arrived yesterday, and I just got it all set up. So I'm excited about that. But I think we all have certain choices to make. And ultimately, we just have to be aware of the consequences of our choices. So we're not necessarily saying, I'm certainly not saying that you have to give up every pleasurable experience or every little toy or gadget that you might want, but you just have to be aware of the consequences of those actions and how it will then impact the bigger picture. So, you know, if you are spending a few $100 on that thing that you just have to have right now, how's that going to impact your bigger financial plan? I mean, you might be able to make up for it later on. And again, maybe you figure out, okay, well, if I spend on this, here's a way I can cut back and save a few dollars by doing something else. But hopefully people are thinking about really what they're willing to commit to, you know, and really thinking bigger picture, thinking about the longer term consequences of all of their actions. And, you know, people have different priorities. So if it's a high priority to get that piece of clothing or that gadget or that new car, and that's a really high priority for them, okay, you don't necessarily have to deprive yourself, but just be aware of what the consequences are if you make that purchase.
I mean, this is. I'm going to bring it back to the context of what you do every day.
Yeah,
I think that what we need is context, and that context becomes so critically important. And the thing that provides the context in your financial lives is that plan that we write out. And so, I'd love to hear from you about the compounding effects of incremental improvements. You know, the idea that these small improvements stack over time. And when you factor those small improvements over 10, 15, 20 years, and you get a chance to pre-experience that in a financial plan, how does that actually help you make better trade-offs?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, for the people that we're talking to, you know, for our clients, sometimes it can be very hard to grasp that concept. But I think if you give examples, people sort of will understand how that can have an impact. I mean, a great example, you know, certainly from my own career has been, you know, now that I've been a financial advisor for about 23 years, roughly, you know, there were people that I might have spoken with a couple of decades ago about their 401k, and you're trying to get them excited about the idea of putting some money aside in their 401k plan, you know, especially if there's like a matching contribution, they're getting free money, and you try to explain why this makes sense. And it's free money. How can you turn away free money? And it's almost like you're twisting their arm, but you get them to agree, okay, fine, I'll put $20 a paycheck into my 401k. But what's interesting is then to see the impact, you know, because then years later, some of these same people would come back to me and say, you know, Mike, I'm so glad you told me to start putting money in that 401k, because now I've got all this money that's sitting in there. And if you hadn't told me, I never would have gotten here. So that's a great example of how, you know, just that little baby step can have such a major impact over a long period of time of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it's the sort of thing that I think if you explain it to people, they intuitively know it. They intuitively understand how that compounding works, but you do have to get them to take that initial step. And that's why sometimes it's so important to take that little, to convince them to take that little tiny baby step, which doesn't seem like a lot, but obviously over a longer period of time, they start to see the effects. And each year as you go back and you revisit the progress that they're making, they start to get it. And then they're able to take that next step, and then the next step after that. And they just keep working towards that goal. And now they're hooked. They're already on board with the program. And hopefully they'll continue on that path.
Great. I have a question, and it's actually directed sort of at both of you, because I wonder, like, so you guys both come from the financial planning industry, and, Jonathan wrote the book Mindful Money, and you wrote the book Incremental Improvements. Do you feel like there's an overlap in those two philosophies? If you want to say, could you maybe outline what you think the overlap is, both of you?
I'd be more than happy to take. Jonathan, you want to go first? You want me to take?
You go ahead. You go.
Okay. So there definitely is. Jonathan's Mindful Money, it was interesting because he obviously covers a lot of the same ground that I cover in terms of the kinds of things that he's talking with his clients about. I think, and certainly getting people to think about, aspects beyond just the money is something that is very important. My approach of incremental improvements is almost sort of kind of getting people to buy into the concept of just starting small and just kind of building over time. Jonathan takes the kind of the Buddhist approach of sort of getting people to be more mindful about what they're doing and the steps that it takes to get where they're trying to get to. Even though it's different approaches, there's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of the ground that we're covering, in terms of the financial planning elements, the health and mindful elements of it. What would you add to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I actually, so Terrie, you asked a question earlier about, how do you help yourself make the virtuous choice? And I think that what mindfulness is the awareness in that moment that you're about to make the choice that pulls you off your plan. And so for me, mindfulness is always, and there's there's tons of different definitions of mindfulness. The definition I always operate with is just a present moment awareness of, your feelings, your emotions, and your senses, and non-judgmental awareness. So, and Mike, I'm not going to give up my ice cream. It's not going to happen. Right. But, and this is my father-in-law did this. I go to my father-in-law's house, and he would have just one fork mark in the ice cream, just one bite.
Yeah.
So he has figured out that he's not going to give it up, but he just takes one bite and puts it away. And then the next day, one more bite, next day, one bite, and that's it. So so the idea is he's mindful. I have this issue with ice cream. And if I have too much of it, I will just eat more of it. Like it creates that craving. And how do I get out of that? Or spending. My iPhone 12 is in the mail as we speak.
You guys. Look, I have
it's very cool. It's pretty cool. Yeah. 5?
Yeah.
iPhone 5. It still works?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it still works. They support that?
Yeah, what do you know? Look, here it is.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think it's the awareness of the decision you're about to make. And then you can be aware of it, and then you can make the incremental improvement. They go hand in glove, hand in hand.
Yeah, that would have been, I wasn't sure exactly how you guys were going to answer that question, but if I were to think up a bridge between the two of your philosophies, that would have been it. Because I feel like, look, my little example right now, I tried Weight Watchers. I actually put on a couple of kilos during the whole confinement thing in Montreal, and my kid was at home, whatever. So I went on Weight Watchers. I'm like, okay, let me just see what this is. And then you're saving the points and you're tracking everything. And then you become aware how every little thing you put in your mouth makes a difference. And, coming from real estate, I feel like in the real estate industry, when you're looking at acquiring properties, we don't deal so much in incremental decisions. I feel like the conversations that I have more with my clients are overcoming fear and indecision when they're about to make a big move. Because it's not really by not buying coffee at Starbucks every morning that you're going to end up making the big move to buy $1 million property with good tenants, bad tenants, good part of town, bad part of town. Usually you're making that decision with something that you've, painstakingly saved, or else capital you've raised somehow. And then people get very scared because they have to make kind of a big immediate decision. So it's not something necessarily that lends itself to incremental thinking. And so maybe, for that reason, I guess, Mike, when I read your book, it really turned some lights on for me, maybe not so much in my financial life, since, I'm more of a real estate person, but definitely like in the other aspects of my life where I see like just the awareness in every minute of what is your behavior you're creating in all those tiny little things that stack up over time.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, the one thing about the Incremental Improvements book is it's interesting that when I talk to people that have read it, everyone seems to get something, in many cases, they get something different out of the book, right? Because there's so many different areas that are covered, people will sort of apply that concept to their own lives and try to figure out what's important to them, what have they been working on, and they're able to take that kind of a philosophy and kind of work it into their own life. So I think it's great. Maybe the financial chapter didn't necessarily resonate with you directly, but obviously it's had an impact in a lot of other areas of your life. And I think that's great. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, like, what light went on for you? I mean, with this, at what point in your life did a light go on in your mind and think, okay, this is really the thing that people need to keep their eye on, and this is really what I need to keep my eye on?
I guess I would go back to, again, early in my career, it's something that it was just a theme that seemed to keep coming up over and over again. I mean, it was something that I think I was doing in my own life, and, having conversations with other people, it seemed like this was the way I was able to get people started on their own path towards usually something financial planning related. But it just seemed to be so universal that it just kind of made sense to take that theme and run with it. And like I said, the book really just kind of grew out of the conversations that I was having with other people. I mean, the topic just sort of came up over and over as people were asking questions. And the incremental improvements, baby steps philosophy, Kaizen, whatever you want to call it, marginal improvements, that kind of a philosophy just seems to resonate with people. Because it's a heck of a lot easier to get someone to do something really small that isn't terribly difficult for them to do. Because to get them to sort of, think bigger picture or do something that's really going to be a dramatic change from what they're used to, that's difficult. That's hard. That's also not realistic. So that's really where it came from. I mean, so I guess it's something that I've kind of been incorporating into my own business and my own life for many years at this point. But I'm just glad that other people have kind of picked up that concept and they're hopefully running with it.
So I'm curious about, and I'd love it if you would comment on the interconnectedness of incremental improvements. I think it's your chapter 20. Just as a quick backstory, in my own life, my financial success comes from a focus on my health.
Right.
I recognized at one point that it was recognized is kind of a loose term here. I was 290, like I weighed, I tipped the scales at a pretty heavy number. And I said, okay, I had a first child, my second child was on the way. And I said, you know what, I probably ought to get this under control so I can be around for these kids to grow up.
Yeah.
And when I did that, my relationship with my wife got better. My self-esteem improved, my business improved. Like the interconnectedness of the little decision that every day I'm going to get up and go for a walk. Okay, now I'm going to do a bench press. Okay, now I'm going to do flexibility training. Now I'm going to do just incrementally improving things in my health, improve everything in my life. So can you talk about that interconnectedness?
Absolutely. I think, because I think you mentioned something about the snow pants incident, I guess, is kind of what triggered you.
You read it. Nice.
I did. Yeah. So, but I think it's a great example because, especially when you think about diet, I mean, the impact that can have. I mean, even just the idea of cutting back on certain foods, your consumption of certain foods, or just the quantity of food that you're consuming, there's obviously an economic impact because you're saving money by not spending on those foods that you were consuming before. So there's a financial element to that. But then also it has an impact on your overall health, which also then can, if you're healthier, hopefully you're spending less money on different doctor's bills or, expenses that are kind of related to poor health. So that also can have a financial impact. And if you also think about that too, if you're maintaining, maybe because of you're healthier, you might look more attractive to other folks. That can have an impact on your relationships that you're having with other people or your spouse or whatever. So, you think about the impact that that has. And then, of course, if you're happier in your relationships, maybe that's even carrying into your business, into your career. You're going through the workday happier, in a better mood, just because you're having, you feel better, emotionally, your mindset is better. So, I mean, it can really have a major impact on a lot of different aspects of your life when you really start to take this kind of a philosophy and apply it. I mean, it just spreads and grows, and hopefully it can even impact other people. So even beyond the impacts that it would have for you as an individual, the hope is that some of the incremental improvements that you're making might even become contagious at some point and spread to other folks as well.
Do you think, so this is, this is not quite developed in my head yet, so I'm just trying to work through this. So do you think that there's a psychological benefit? In other words, it's a muscle. The idea of making incremental improvements is a muscle that when we exercise, we are better able to make future incremental improvements. And so there's a psychological switch that by noticing, you mentioned this earlier, if I save $20 a month, I can see the benefits of it. And then I can go, wow, what if I did 30? And it doesn't really hurt me to do 30. What if I did 40? And you sort of build that psychological muscle. The discipline comes easier. And now you can make incremental changes in lots of places.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. The one thing that I had heard was when it comes to forming habits, it takes something like, for most people, the average is it takes them about 8 weeks to make a habit truly a permanent habit, right? So for someone who has been a couch potato all their life and they've never exercised, and, I guess an example of like a New Year's resolution that, you might hear from somebody is, hey, I'm going to run a marathon. And this is the person that, they've been a couch potato all their life. They've never exercised. And all of a sudden they think they're going to run a marathon. Well, first things first, let's start by maybe just taking a little jog around the neighborhood, and getting used to maybe just running a little bit. And then you try to work your way up, day by day. Maybe you're running a little further. You work your way up to the point where you're running a mile, and then maybe 3 miles, and maybe 5 miles, and you're running, whatever. And eventually you get to the point where you're able to run that marathon, but it's literally day by day. And it doesn't happen overnight. If you just jog around the block and then you never exercise again, it's not going to do any good. But if you do it every day, by the time you hit about that 8-week period, now it's a habit. Now you're used to exercising every day. And then if you do it for another 4 weeks on top of that, and another 4 weeks on top of that, eventually it's like you'll miss it if you don't run or if you don't exercise that day. Your body misses it. It's because it's become a habit. You've been doing it for so long, it feels like something's missing if I don't do that. And it's the same with any other activity or any other habit, any other choice that we've made. Once it becomes a habit, and again, it's just a matter of making that mindful decision to take something on, right? To make it a part of your day. And then once it becomes that habit, it's a muscle. I mean, so you're absolutely right. I mean, for the person that, if they've been exercising every day for that 8 weeks, okay, now they start thinking, what else can I do? Maybe I can run a little further. Maybe let me do something with my arms. I'll get some barbells and start, lifting, and maybe I'll get an exercise bike too, or something like that. They start all of a sudden adding additional elements into that exercise program. Or in the case of money, obviously the easy response is, I'm going to save a little bit more each paycheck, or I'm going to figure out some ways to cut the Starbucks out of my my daily routine and save those dollars into my retirement planning. But yeah, once you get used to it, it's definitely a muscle. It definitely becomes easier to take that next step, the next incremental improvement.
Yeah, I wonder if there's not also, you talk about the psychological compounding effect of incremental successes. And I think there's also something to do with success and failure, because I think one of the reasons why we get demotivated is often because we feel like we're not succeeding at the very big goal we've set for ourselves. And if you're able to sort of build your confidence by having small little successes, that ends up creating precisely that virtuous cycle that you were talking about, where it spills into other aspects of your life. Like, for example, when you're able to stay on track with your big goals, your big health goals, your relationship gets better because you feel better about yourself. And then when your relationship gets better, then all of a sudden you have less conflicts in your life. Then all of a sudden you have more resources to be at work. And so it's as if like kind of this thing of labeling something in your mind a success or a failure. Like if all you can see is the huge goal, okay, I want to be a millionaire. And it seems like every day you get out of bed and you fail at being a millionaire, well, you get into like a negative psychological spiral where you think you're failing at something, where actually the variable that's missing is the time variable. Because you are actually succeeding, you just don't realize you're succeeding. And like, you know, all of those things that are incremental, that respond incrementally are like that, be it like weight loss, like, okay, you lost 0.5 pound this week. So you are actually succeeding at losing 30 pounds. It's just you're missing a year.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's definitely that kind of an element there where it does take time for these changes to occur. And, you know, certainly just because you have quote unquote failed at one thing doesn't mean you should abandon completely and just give up. I mean, what it really means is, okay, how do I get back on track? You know, how do I reverse what I've been doing? You know, I mean, Terrie, you gave a really interesting example, and I think especially in this time of COVID, you know, a lot of people have kind of, you know, they've gained the COVID-19, as they say, you know, that kind of thing. I think it's,
Yep.
I mean, you know, but a lot of people have. I mean, you know, so, or not even just that, but I think a lot of people have sort of gotten into some bad habits through this pandemic. You know, they've been binge watching certain programs on TV, or, you know, some of these streaming services where they're just watching TV and they'll watch like, you know, 12 hours straight of a TV show that they want to binge watch. And, you know, what they really need to do at some point is start questioning, is this really the best thing I could be doing with my time? Or is there something else I can do here that might be a little bit more productive, a little bit more valuable to me in the long run, in the future? You know, and I use that as an example because I know how many people have they've seen like every episode of Tiger King or whatever. I mean, yeah, all these different shows that, you know, really, is it really going to make that much of a difference in your life that you've watched every episode of this, you know, this particular series? And the reality is there's so much great stuff, great content that's out there. I mean, I remind people that, especially in this pandemic, if you do happen to have some extra time, look at, you know, Masterclass or Coursera or Udacity, or even most of the Ivy League universities right now are streaming many of their courses online for free. And what a great opportunity, you know, with this free time. Some people do have some extra free time, and what a great opportunity to learn something new, you know, learn something useful, learn something valuable, whether it's learning more about real estate, whether it's learning more about investing, whether it's learning more about nuclear physics or something like that. You know, you could certainly use your time to learn something new. You know, and I think that also can have an impact longer term in terms of opening up future career opportunities, maybe triggering other business ideas. You know, certainly more valuable than just, you know, saying, oh yeah, I watched every episode of that TV show. Whatever it might have been. So trying to make the most of it, and I think it's important for people to really think about, you know, all of these different things that are out there, and just being mindful, being aware of how they're spending their time, how they're using their time, and is there a way they could make a little incremental improvement just to do something a little bit better with their time along the way.
It strikes me a little bit that you've taken away my my YouTube comedy you know, addiction a little bit. So I'll work on that. So
you still watch, but again, it's, you know, do you watch like 5 hours straight of this, or do you watch like a couple of clips that people said you got to watch this? It's pretty funny. That's fine, but it's when it becomes like you're sitting in your pajamas all day long watching TV, that becomes a problem. So
after my kids go to bed about, you know, 8 or 9. Eli goes to bed later than that now, so he's usually up when I'm doing this. But I'm sitting in the corner chair in my living room, and he goes to bed, my wife goes to bed, and he goes to bed. It's like 2 a.m. now, and I'm like, oh my God, I've been watching it doesn't happen often, but it happens where I'll be like, you know, I gotta rein this in. So really,
the YouTube spiral is real, man.
Oh
yeah, right.
And there's infinite content, infinite.
And they just become like, if you've been watching these videos, they know what's the next one we should put up. Keep you hooked for another 3 to 5 minutes. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about it though is one of the things that I did to motivate myself, after I think you called it the ski pants incident, which I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna use that. I found a YouTuber. His name is Eric Thomas, E.T. the hip hop preacher, and I would go on and watch him. And he had like 5 or 6 minute videos, and it was all motivation. It was like, you matter, you can make this happen, you can do it, and that was really helpful. So if you find whether it's Udemy or a course or a masterclass or something you can do and learn and get yourself moving in the right direction, I think there's huge value in that. There's also deep rabbit holes, but at the same time, there's huge value in some of these tools.
Yeah. No, there's definitely good content out there. Don't get me wrong. And for what it's worth, I haven't really talked about this yet, but I came from a television background, actually. I used to be a TV news producer with the NBC affiliate in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I also worked with America's Health Network. So I actually have a TV production background. And certainly there's way more content today than there was back when I was doing that in the 90s anyway. But, so I don't want to say anything negative or bad about TV. I'm a TV fan. I'm a movie fan. But like everything else, it's in moderation. And I'm aware of what the limits are and how much becomes too much.
Mm-hmm. But let me ask you a question, which I don't think, unless maybe I didn't see it outlined in the book, but what occurs to me is that in the idea of gaining awareness of the little choices that you make, I find that tracking is very useful. It can also be really annoying, but in terms of gaining awareness, if you track what you're doing, you're able to trace those incremental awareness of what's going on, so.
Yes. Well, that is an excellent point. I mean, certainly with the financial planning that we often do with our clients, we do obviously encourage them to put things down on paper, right? I mean, you don't want to just keep it up in your mind here and just hope that you remember it. You want to make it something that's physical, tangible, that you can touch. And certainly the same concept would apply to other goals. If your ultimate goal is something related to exercise or weight loss, diet, etc., be sure to put down, what is the ultimate goal, and then try to start breaking it down on paper, maybe, to figure out what steps it's going to take to ultimately achieve that goal. So I would agree. I mean, it definitely helps to kind of make it tangible and make it something that you can look at over a period of time. Because I know, my memory is starting to go, I think, to some extent. And if you just kind of say to yourself, I'm going to remember this, and then a week later, what was I trying to remember again? You definitely want to have something tangible that is permanent rather than just a memory in your mind that may fade over time. So I would agree completely. You definitely want to get those goals on paper and then really map out how you're going to achieve that goal, and and then work it into your calendar, whether you use your cell phone or whether I'm still a Franklin Planner guy. My wife hates the fact that I'm still using my paper Franklin Planner, but it keeps me on target. I mean, it gives me my list of things to do, and I'm able to kind of schedule everything in my Franklin Planner. It works for me. So whatever system works for the people that are watching, I would certainly encourage you to do something like that, whether it's on your phone or whether it's a notepad or whether it's a Franklin Planner or some other calendar system. I would encourage folks to do that.
Great. Yeah, great advice. So I don't know if, Mike, there's anything else you wanted to add. We're kind of, I think, at the end of our questions for this episode. Did you have any closing comments?
Well, I will say for anybody who is interested in kind of learning more, they want to check out the book. Of course, it is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But if they do go to my website, incrementalimprovements.com, they can actually download the PDF version for free. So it's www.incrementalimprovements.com. Check it out. And then also, I'll go ahead and give a plug because I actually have another book that's launching, and it has nothing to do with what we've been talking about this hour, but I do have another book that's launching November 22nd. It is called Fourth Down and Damn, A Lineman's Story. The autobiography of Leon Searcy is told by Mike Brodsky. It has nothing to do with my work as a financial advisor or talking about incremental improvements. But the book is actually a really interesting story about a former lineman who played with the Steelers and the Jaguars and the Miami Hurricanes. For any sports fans out there, please do check this out. This is worth reading. I know I spent some time talking about like all the shows you shouldn't be watching. This book is worth reading if you're a sports fan. Totally awesome investment of your time. Great story. Check it out.
Okay, well, Mike, thanks so much for taking this time to talk to us and for being our guest today. And hopefully we're going to inspire people who listen to this show to make those little incremental changes and to not go into whatever unvirtuous spiral they could get trapped in.
Let's hope. Well, Terrie, Jonathan, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 3 of the Mindful Wealth podcast, our interview with Mike Brodsky on the subject of incremental improvements. If there are 2 key takeaways from this episode, the first might be that we need to consider the time factor when we're evaluating whether or not we're succeeding at our long-term goals. Incremental improvements take time to stack up, and so every day when you feel like you're either succeeding or failing at your long-term goals, you need to really think about how those increments are going to stack up over time. The second takeaway has to do with consequences. All of the little choices that we make all the time have long-term consequences. It's just that we don't see the fruits of those efforts for really quite a long time. And that's again where the incremental improvements, the incremental steps that we take every day stack up and end up producing the lives that we have. Once again, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Mindful Wealth Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, remember to give us a rating and leave a comment, subscribe, and share. You can find Jonathan at mindful.money, and you'll find Terrie at terrieshower.com. Their books, Mindful Money and Mindful Landlord, are available on Amazon. Look to the show notes for our guests' contact info and any links discussed in today's episode.